Good morning, Lucas.
Good morning, Nancy. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing today?
We're great.
Hi, Nancy.
You know, there's
Hi,
usually this
Sandra.
initially high level of adrenaline when you start a conference like this with so many eminent guests from around the world, but hopefully, as we proceed into the conference, and let's start with a couple of questions because, well, I thought of the most unpredictable question first. Nancy, tell us, unites or divides, and why this question in the first place? You know, designing the content for a two-day conference like this, you normally have a situation where you want to start with one of the most impactful, important, timely topics of the day. So does it unite or does it divide, and why the question in the first place?
Yes, Lucas, and good morning to everyone that's dialed in for the conference. I'm hoping you have a wonderful 2 days. I know there's lots of fantastic talks lined up, and it's a great question to start with because from my perspective, I'd really hope that diversity and inclusion is a topic that would unite us. Certainly it is challenging because I think depending on how you perceive the topic and whether you share the views of everyone who is represented through diversity, it can sometimes be challenging for folks to really understand whether or not the discussion is there to divide or to unite us. But certainly from my perspective, it's something that I would love to believe that it is a uniting topic. It's something where we need to create spaces which allow for discussion and allow for debate, to share perspectives and different views. But hopefully in doing so, people will understand that we are all humans at the end of the day, that we all share the same aspirations and hopes throughout our lives, and that really when we're working together, if we can treat each other with respect and dignity, then we can definitely achieve really great things.
Well, hopefully, yes. Philippe, the shaky part is
Yes.
still there. Yeah, we can hear you. Finally.
Yes, I apologize for that. We had some technical issues, so I'm using a mobile phone in a hotel room. Well, indeed, diversity and inclusion, I think the premise of the whole thing is that it is something which can unite. And the idea is actually to unite people. The idea is to have an ethical stance where you allow people, other people, to be themselves. An ethical stance where you create in your heart enough space for other people so they can be themselves, and you allow them to be themselves, even if that would not necessarily fit in your worldview.
Mm-hmm. But why the question? How do you think, Philippe? Why even start with a question like that? Divides or unites? Why the division in the first place?
Yes, it's quite interesting because actually what happens is that your freedom starts where my obligation to respect that freedom starts, actually. So if it is your freedom to think about science and say and measure things and conclude that the Earth turns around the sun, well, it might offend you in your worldview. But the idea is to, well, allow other people to be themselves and discover things by themselves. So you see that whatever the stance that everybody should be allowed to speak up, everybody can be themselves, might be a difficult and challenging stance if your worldview doesn't necessarily have a lot of space for that. Mm-hmm. Religion is an interesting one because most religions exclude other religions. Most religions have some ideas about, for example, well, being gay is a bad thing, and so if you have a city in which you have a lot of gays, well, a certain God might feel very bad about that and even smite the whole city. Other books you might find information that the opinion of a woman is only half worth the opinion of a man. Well, if that is your religion, then it might not necessarily be easy to adapt to a worldview where men and women should at least be given equal chances. And actually, then you will find that there is much more similarity between men and women than would divide us. Especially in leadership, it seems that both genders do absolutely fine.
Which in a way is, I suppose, ironic, because what all religions, or just about every religion, has in common is preaching tolerance also. So potentially contradictory there.
And it sounds like a paradox of tolerance, right?
It is. It is one of many that we'll be addressing today. Just as a housekeeping note, so to say, we are keen to surprise our speakers with a number of additional questions. We'll be asking them today. But let me come back to the original question: division, dividing, and uniting. Nancy, is it fair to say that something has changed, something major has happened in the past few years? I've just completed a couple of interviews with researchers around the topic of caring roles, especially men in care. And one of the research assumptions there was that with the global pandemic and economic crises, you see men coming back to more traditional roles, like, breadwinners, hunters and gatherers, so to say, to go back to ancient history. So has anything changed in terms of this balance of dividing and uniting in the past few years,
Yes.
given the circumstances?
So, yes, well, I haven't reviewed that research in particular, Lucas, but I would say that certainly, undoubtedly, the pandemic has had an impact on our working lives that, as many would cite, it's sort of once in a generation. It obviously, I think, during the pandemic, maybe forced a number of individuals to revert to type in some ways. From a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, perhaps some of our very basic needs were threatened during the height of the pandemic. Even our own survival was at times questioned, and therefore, we may have seen that certain individuals may have taken solace and reverted to very traditional understandings of either their gender or their role in society. And however, it was also presenting an opportunity to do things very differently. And we certainly see that the pandemic, for many, it happened during the digital age. And in any other generation, we perhaps would not have been able to continue working in the way that we did. And this was the opportunity for both men and women, for example.
Yeah,
And
it's fair to call it a blessing in a huge disguise this time.
absolutely. And I think many men who would perhaps, those with families, who may not have previously chosen to take on a caring responsibility for their dependents, had the opportunity to do so. And the pandemic lasted a good 2 years, and therefore, post-pandemic, I think many individuals, both male and female, are thinking about the types of working lives that they want to have going forwards, and how the pandemic may have shaped opportunities for them to connect and to have a working life that allows them to connect with their families and their friends in ways in which they hadn't been able to previously. So there is certainly a need now, both in supporting greater participation of women in the workplace, a need for organisations to also provide that opportunity for men to also have a greater participation in their families' lives, and not necessarily always stereotyping them as the breadwinner in a family.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Yes, I also think we shouldn't underestimate how dramatically different the last few thousand years have been as compared to the last few million years of human evolution, or the few 100 million years of mammalian evolution.
Well, Philippe, a few thousand years is quite a point of reference, isn't it?
Well, it is a blink of an eye in how the evolution of the brain works. Our brain is still working largely the way it was wired up on the African savannah. You can't change that so fast. And you give some interesting examples, but 24 February, we had another example. So there is a war in Ukraine, there is a massive invasion, And what happens? Men are not allowed to leave the country. Nobody feels bad about that. Men are supposed to go and fight and probably die, and women are supposed to leave the country with the children. And that is something that our society largely accepts. And about every man and every woman in that situation, they largely found that that is the right thing to do. So
now that you say it, Philippe,
yes, please.
Yes, please finish.
Well, the thing is that deep inside, we still carry the results of these hundreds millions of mammalian evolution, where man is actually disposable. In evolutionary sense, a woman in mammals is way, way more valuable than a man. And survival of the species has been a very, very difficult thing and not ensured thing until the last few thousand years, where we were so successful since we had agriculture. And so things start to change, and things will change. And it is fantastic that man can take more care of their children, but in the end, it's a luxury problem.
Yeah, you're absolutely
And
right.
it's and when the going gets tough, if there is something really going wrong, then you will have to revert to the thing that, from an evolutionary standpoint, makes sense.
Well, Philippe,
and deep inside,
we
yes,
really couldn't hope for a bigger picture perspective than the one provided by you. I suppose a fully evolutionary, anthropological insight into our really 3-year perspective, which is what I especially want us to focus on in this debate. But it's the background that you've just laid out for us is super important, Philippe. So thank you for that. But before we get to the very first question reaching us here in the studio, we already have a very interesting question coming from Tatiana. So just to remind you, use the chat window to share your questions. Hopefully we'll have more than enough time to include all of your questions and address them to our guests. But before we ask this question, let's narrow down the perspective to say 3 years, the past 3 years. And we have seen those variables. Philippe, you've just mentioned the war east of Poland. You've mentioned the big variables affecting people's attitudes to diversity and inclusion. Would you say that over the past 3 years, there's been an increase in unity or division when we talk about D&I? Where has there been more accumulation of moods, trends, different types of phenomena around this topic?
Interesting one. I don't have...
Yeah, Nancy?
What did you? Certainly from my perspective, at least at Franklin Templeton, I think we're moving towards unity on the topic of diversity and inclusion. Within our organization, diversity and inclusion is perceived as an opportunity for our organization, not just a problem to be solved. It's an opportunity for us to become a better performing business, but ultimately also to serve a greater and more diverse client base. We recognize there is a great transfer of wealth happening within the global economy, not necessarily at pace, but is certainly accelerating. And in being a customer focused or centric organization, we have a duty to be more responsive to a greater variety of customers and their needs and how they wish to show up in the world. And therefore, in order to serve those customers, we have to equip our people with the understanding of how to relate to those customers, understand their needs, and to provide the investment solutions that meet them. We are there to help the widest possible and variety of people achieve the most important milestones in their lives. And therefore, for us, it's not an either or. It's not a zero-sum game where one group will win and another will lose, but it's around really increasing our ability to be more relevant to more people in the world, and ultimately help a greater number of people achieve their greatest ambitions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Actually, I would have to start answering that question in very much the same way. From my perspective, because we don't have much data about what happened yet, but it's a very interesting period where suddenly the whole family, both men and women, were together at home for very long periods of time, and the role of men or women, for people working in service centers at least, of course are different when you're a construction worker, but those roles, they were suddenly exactly the same. And it was so much easier to combine work and life. And I think what COVID did is shifting the balance between work and life, or adjusting the balance in such a way that it is way easier to combine things. And it became so much more of an inclusive place where it doesn't matter that you're using a wheelchair. Anyhow, everybody is online.
Yeah,
Or it
absolutely.
doesn't matter you have a young child you have to take care of. Anyhow, you can start working more flexibly. And so in HSBC, we have now a system that really for everyone, even people working on very highly time critical things like payments, we organize it in such a way that if you need a long lunch break to take care of the kids, for example, you can do that. And that is one of those fantastic things that COVID brought to us, I guess.
It's one of those fantastic things that COVID brought to us. Philippe, I'm going to quote you on that. Not many people would have emphasized the fantastic things that COVID, but you're absolutely right. You have a point there.
Or connect fantastic with COVID.
Exactly.
Another paradox.
Exactly. Stefano,
Yes,
in the
yes.
meantime, has kindly joined us. Hello, Stefano. Let me introduce you again. Stefano Dallafina, representing State Street, Marketing and Communication Manager, Italy, Germany, Switzerland. Hello, Stefano. You can hear me, hopefully.
Hello, good day everyone, and apologies for being late. Technical glitches which COVID has brought to us probably, but cannot blame on COVID today.
Well, it's always good to use COVID as an excuse as well, not only something positive.
Yes.
Now, so let me start on a humorous note, because so far we've asked the most counterintuitive of questions, given the title of this debate, that is, does D&I unite more than divide, or vice versa? So that was the question I'd like you to address. But in the meantime, since we have you and Philippe, I'm not sure, well, people like me who do a lot around public speaking and nonverbal communication are keen to notice small details like when you put your camera down on the table and it looks from you sort of as you're putting it on the table. I'm not sure if you're aware of the fact that it creates the impression that it's meant to be like a towering figure. If you go back to good old classic films of Orson Welles, you will learn more about it. So it's a joke. I want to really relate to this fundamental question, Stefano. In your experience, the past 3 years, does D&I unite or divide more? And if yes, why?
Well, it's an interesting question, which personally, because I'm very fond of inclusion, diversity, and equity, it unites. The truth is that sometimes, I wouldn't say that it divides, it creates different expectations, it creates different, let's say, responses to this. I was connecting at the time when Nancy was speaking about how they treat inclusion, diversity, and equity within her company. And I would say that it really depends on whom we're speaking with, how that person is either open or closed to discuss about inclusion, diversity, and equity. And that's the beauty. I'm going to be obvious here, and that's the beauty of diversity. That's the beauty, because we have so many opinions out there which are countless. We are 8 billions on the earth, and 8 billions different thinking, thoughts, approaches to general life in general. So going back to your question.
That's all very well, Stefano, but if you think about it this way, that inclusion is also about listening to just about every voice you can gather and listen to within an organization. So if if there is some kind of potential for division or misunderstanding, is it important from organizational perspective to develop tools for really better listening, better understanding what is happening and why?
Absolutely, yes, I think so. I personally think so, because as I was saying, 8 billion people out there, and we have to hear everybody. We have to listen to everybody. Impossible? Well, sometimes yes, though we have to be prepared. And if out there is somebody who's not caring about what the company does from an inclusion, diversity, and equity perspective, we have to listen to that person as well, because it's in his and in her interest.
Well, I can understand why we want to start with think big. Philippe referring to millions of years of evolution, you, Stefano, referring to 8 billion people on the planet, but narrowing it down to the experience of your particular organizations, companies. Would you say that it matters perhaps more than in the past, and by past I mean, let's say 4, 5, 10 years ago, to understand where the division may be coming from? And if yes, how do you do it?
It certainly matters more than in the past. We have a format at Franklin Templeton called Courageous Conversations, which are safe spaces that we create for colleagues to come together monthly to discuss particular aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, to understand those different perspectives, challenge each other, debate around topics. There are norms that you have to create for those spaces, which are those which are respectful. We're there to discuss the topic, to separate the topic from an individual person. And we find them to be extremely educational and very productive in assisting with the learning experience that is associated with DEI.
Thank you very much, Nancy. We have like 12 minutes left and already 2 very interesting questions. But before that, I'd like Philippe and Stefano to relate to that. How do you address any potential of the arising some kind of division resulting from, say, oversaturation of the D&I conversation in your companies?
Well,
which is just one example.
Absolutely, and I would like to, let's say, continue on what Nancy was digressing on. And basically, I think that creating a safe environment, a place where people can be free or feel to be free, is one to, let's say, inclusion, diversity, and equity to the topic. I remember a few years ago when we were doing an internal event during which we were talking about broadly inclusion, diversity, and equity, and more specifically LGBTQ+. And a person in the audience, an employee, made coming out freely, open on the floor, and that made me shiver. Wow, that's something which is very positive, and we perhaps are on the right way. We perhaps are on the right track. Still a lot to do, yet there is a confirmation that something positive is being done.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Stefano. You've just reminded me of a debate at an association meeting with just about 100+ multinational corporations represented, when we talked about how corporate ecosystems have changed in terms of workplace psychology, because I suppose it's fair to say that in the past, employees were in a kind of do follow what the corporation is telling you mode. And later, it became much more complex psychologically, where the employee is at the heart of the big questions. So, Philippe, with that, Philippe has just disappeared, so maybe the question was not exactly in line with
we can still blame on COVID.
Yeah, he will blame it on COVID or evolution. Let's see. So let's go to the questions our audience is asking us. Let's start with Tatiana. Tatiana says, I think DEI is by the nature of the work going to contribute to divisions. It is, after all, about shifting power dynamics and creating more inclusive and equitable workplaces. So the question I like to explore is, how do we move from divisions to unity along this process? So you see, the question implicitly suggests there has been quite a bit of division.
Yeah, I think that not everybody is prepared, not everybody is willing to deal with inclusion, diversity, and equity. And that's a position which I think we have to respect. Again, I don't think it divides. I'm very biased on this one because of my experience, because of the experience which I have had in the past, in the old days when I was working in another financial company many years ago in London, in the mid-90s. And today my experience with State Street is positive. I'm biased, I know it, but I think it unites. And going back, we have to be prepared in listening to those who think the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I accept the comment.
Back to the studio.
I would even dare to say that I agree to a certain extent. It unites certain groups, leaving others outside. I think what we observe these days is a further polarization of our workplaces. Mm-hmm. So I wish I could fully sign up for what Stefano is saying, yet I feel there is another side of the same coin. Maybe Nancy will contribute on that part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think I do agree with Stefano, and certainly from my perspective, organizations take a stance really in terms of where they stand in relation to what we're asking colleagues to unite around is the willingness to hear different perspectives. We're not necessarily asking colleagues to change their fundamental values or beliefs, but when you join an organization, you also join an organization and you choose to align to their organizational values. And if one of those values is also treating colleagues with respect and dignity, then that's what you sign up to when you sign up to work at Franklin Templeton. It's what we expect of everyone. So I think in terms of the business case for D&I is already well known and well researched and well documented. The train has left the station is the phrase that I think Stefano used previously. You have to choose to be on that train with the organization and progress towards the future because
Nancy,
a global marketplace is the reality of the digital age, and working with a huge heterogeneous customer base is the reality of the world in which we're doing business.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting voice. I would say the fact alone that you have used the phrase, we have to, there's the train you're on, you have to accept it, etc., which brings me to the question that Camille is asking, but before that, Anna was first. Anna is asking, don't you think that perceiving D&I as an abstract idea and not linking it with business may be one of the reasons why D&I might divide? Which is really like going back to the old corporate social responsibility question. Should it always be relevant to your business activities?
And yes. I think, yes, but within our organization, we've made a case that it links directly to our business because it's serving a more diversified customer base. We have a program in the US called the Changing Faces of Wealth, which is an education program which looks at how wealth is transferring into the hands of different populations that may have historically had access to wealth, and therefore being able to serve those customers means that we need to understand those customers and their viewpoints and their needs and the challenges they face in the variety of lived experiences that they have. So it is absolutely directly related to our business purpose.
Thank you very much. Stefano, you wanted to add
Yes,
something?
and I can add one comment on this one, which is essentially walk the talk. So when you say something and you commit to that, actually do it, prove it. And therefore, what I think could happen is that this, in quotes, sense of D&I divides, I wouldn't say disappear, but could be soften up. So we're not perfect as State Street, we know it. We try our best because on the other side of the company, there is a customer, there is an investor, there is another human being with hopefully same interests like the ones we have beyond the business interest, which we have to remind ourselves that is, we're working for corporations which have a profit as a main goal. So we have to remind this.
Sure.
But on the other side, we have human beings to deal with.
Thank you very much. I suppose we only have 2.5 minutes left and 3 questions to address. So let me put your memories to a little test. I will read out all those questions and please choose whichever you want to address. Camille is asking, do you think that DEI should be forced as part of corporate culture or should it be only voluntary for employees? I suppose Nancy has already addressed that question from Franklin Templeton perspective. Yasfal is asking Philippe, who is not here. We can understand that workplace colleagues will surely accept non-resident, that is outsiders, as part of the society, but we come across many racial attacks against non-residents. How can we teach the society to accept outsiders and treat them as part of this society? And Tomasz, let's assume that I am your employee in an entry job position. How will you convince me that it is worth following the D&I values when working with you? What is my individual benefit?
Wow, tricky and nice ones. If I may, some seconds on the very last question. Do I have to convince you that D&I is good? I don't know. Do I have to convince you that this is the right place to work because there is a good sense of unity amongst employees, that we have a good track record in terms of what we have done outside with the communities, that you're going to be treated, again, addressing it equally? Probably yes. I don't know if I have to convince you, yet you have to understand that we have something in place that eventually, if you could be discriminated along the line, you know that you're going to be treated well. You're going to be in a safe place.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the side effects of what you've just said is that this kind of approach obviously is more in the follow what the company is saying spirit. Do not think different, because if you do, there are risks attached for you. So that's also one way to look at it, however provocative on my side.
Yes.
Nancy, 7 seconds left. What say you?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to grasp that the equity applies to everyone. I think it may be a challenging thing for individuals to hold in their minds simultaneously, but it really isn't about pitching one side against another. It's equity for everyone, opportunity for everyone, a safe space for everyone. We all want to feel valued and have the opportunities that we all deserve, and that's really just what we're seeking to achieve, really through the work of D&I within corporate organizations.
Thank you so much. And yet, I suppose we're seeing lots of questions being asked. So one of the things we could certainly encourage our guests and conference participants, especially those big corporate international brands, is just like Nancy said at the beginning of this discussion, the topic of D&I is well researched and the benefits are well understood. So perhaps, Sandra, I would think it's a great idea to publish a lot more around that on your corporate websites, around how you measure the positive impact of having mature D&I policies in your companies. Well, our guests have already disappeared. I hope they are still there because we definitely want to thank them for their contribution. So let's close this opening panel. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Philippe. It's been great to have you despite the initial difficulties of trying to connect with you scattered all over Europe. Stefano from Milan and Nancy from London, Philippe from Krakow or not. We'll see. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.